Hi everyone, it is Ms. White, and here today I am going to talk to you about Elizabeth Fricker's reading from the VCE course for 2025. If you are after Miranda Fricker, that will be in a different episode. In a different episode. Oh, I'm a fancy TV show now. No, I mean a different video. So today I'm just going to be talking about Elizabeth Fricker. This will probably, most of you will be studying this in relation to the first and third key questions, the one on testimony and expertise, and the one that's on trust. So before we begin, I guess it's like expertise as well. But before we begin, just the word epistemically means relating to knowledge. So we are going to start here. In advance, I'm sorry about how the scanning has worked. Unfortunately, with the way that my book is bound and my annotations are bound, it was very hard to get my app to scan it. And it was even worse when I tried to do it on a printer. So you're going to have to forgive the curved over words. Sorry. So let's start with 2II, a principle concerning deferential acceptance. With these points about the need for shared meaning made, we can proceed with the main positive idea. We can formulate a general principle. And this one is TDAP1. And I would be, if I was you, I'd be putting a circle or a box around it. This is TDAP1, the Testimony Deferential Acceptance Principle 1. For one properly to accept that P, so remembering that P means some sort of proposition, some sort of belief, for one to properly accept that P on the basis of trust in another's testimony, that P, her word, that P, requires that she be epistemically well enough placed with respect to P so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether P, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and that she be better epistemically placed with respect to P than oneself, and that one recognize these things to be so. Now, I know that a lot of students, when they say like the whole that P or that subject S, try and think, replace P with some sort of propositions, some sort of belief. For one to properly accept that 2 + 2 = 4 on the basis of trust in another's testimony that 2 + 2 = 4, her word that 2 + 2 = 4 requires that she be epistemically well enough placed with respect to 2 + 2 = 4, so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether 2 + 2 = 4, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and that she'd be better epistemically placed with respect to 2 + 2 = 4 than oneself, and that one recognize these things to be so. So I find that it helps if you actually like sub in some sort of belief or do the proposition, a proposition. But TDAP1 is essentially the testifier. They need to be epistemically well placed. They need to be more of an expert, no, like more or less an expert in the particular thing that they're giving a belief about or testifying about. The testifier epistemically well placed enough that the belief is almost certainly knowledge. Perhaps they're a mathematician. Perhaps they are someone who's studied maths before. They can affirm, or it can almost be knowledge, that 2 + 2 = 4. The testifier needs to be better epistemically placed than you. And you need to be able to recognize both of these things. You need to be able to recognize that the testifier is perhaps better at mathematics than you and more qualified to speak on mathematics than you, and is so close to being, I guess, is so well placed with knowledge in mathematics that 2 + 2 = 4 that you can accept their belief. Obviously, you don't need to be a mathematician to have 2 + 2 = 4, but someone who has studied maths, you would need someone like that. You wouldn't just you wouldn't believe a 1-year-old child that 2 + 2 = 4 if they told you, because you're probably better epistemically placed than a 1 or 2-year-old child. And a 1 or 2-year-old child probably hasn't been alive enough or long enough to be epistemically well placed in relation to 2 + 2 = 4. So you need to consider that. And that's what Fricker gets at straight away in this reading, is here is TDAP1. She gives you this principle. She says TDAP1, I don't know if any other teachers, it'll be interesting to know, but do any other teachers go, TDAP1, or is everyone saying TDAP? Because I'm definitely saying TDAP. TDAP1 specifies a condition necessary for epistemically proper trusting acceptance of another's testimony on some topic. So this is all to do with expertise. When can we trust someone else's expertise, and when can we trust someone else's beliefs? It is not sufficient because while the hearer's cognizance of the testifier's strong epistemic position via V, which means in relation to, the topic makes it rational for her, other things being equal, confidently to expect the testifier's judgment about the matter in question to be correct, to deem her competent about the matter in question. TDAP1 does not speak to the question of the testifier's sincerity. As I have argued elsewhere, the overall trustworthiness of a speaker's testimony breaks down into these two quite separate components. In this investigation, I concentrate on the circumstances in which deferential acceptance, so deferring, that is, deferring to someone else's judgment, deferential acceptance of another's judgment as expressed in her sincere testimony is epistemically proper. Thus, having noted the need for adequate warrant to believe the speaker sincere, I put further consideration of sincerity aside, assuming in what follows that insincerity is not an issue in whether to trust the other's testimony. So she's just giving you this principle. She says that for the sake of this article, she's going to put aside the issue of insincerity. She's just going to assume that there is sincerity, because I mean, there's a variety of reasons why people might be insincere when they're giving you a particular view or a particular belief. But for the sake of just getting to when can we defer to another person's belief, or when can we make a deferential acceptance, she's just putting that to the side. We're just going to assume that for the most part, insincerity isn't an issue. That's a whole different issue. For the sake of when can we accept someone's testimony, we're going to put that aside. So let's keep going. The matter of sincerity is one reason why TDAP1 specifies only a necessary, not a sufficient condition for epistemically proper deference to another's testimony. So she's admitting here straight away, she's like, okay, the reason why TDAP1 is only a necessary, not sufficient condition for relating to knowledge, proper deference to another's testimony. The only other reason I can think of why other things would not be equal regarding the hearer's expectation of correctness of the testifier's expressed judgment is if she were also aware of significant contrary testimony. Contrary testimony would be epistemically significant if it either comes from another equally well-qualified expert, or in some cases, if it is from many mutually independent sources, albeit not especially expert ones. So she's talking about when is contrary testimony or contrary testimony significant. It's when it's coming from someone who's equally well-qualified expert. If they're giving you an opinion or giving you a belief, if we have two people that are equally qualified in mathematics, giving us 2 + 2 = 4, or one giving 2 + 2 = 4 and one giving 2 + 2 = 5, how do we decide if they're equally qualified in mathematics? A more refined condition incorporating these two factors, which is normatively both necessary and sufficient for deferential acceptance, is TDAP2. So she's like, okay, this is, for the most part, TDAP1 is how we can defer to someone else's belief when we don't have enough knowledge in something or enough backing for our beliefs. But TDAP2 takes these two problems she's just discussed into account. So it takes into account that it's TDAP1 plus if the testifier is speaking sincerely, plus we are not aware of any significant contrary or contrary testimony. TDAP2, One properly accepts that P on the basis of trust in another's testimony that P, her word that P, just if she speaks sincerely, and she is epistemically well enough placed with respect to P, so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether P, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and she is better epistemically placed with respect to P than oneself, and one recognizes all these things to be so, and one is not aware or of significant contrary testimony regarding P. So what does this mean? It means that if you don't know the answer to something and you want to form a belief, you're relying on an expert. When can you defer to an expert's belief? So when can one can properly accept that 2 plus 2 equals 4 on the basis of trust in another's testimony that 2 plus 2 equals 4, or her word that 2 plus 2 equals 4, just if she speaks sincerely and she is epistemically well enough placed with respect to 2 plus 2 equals 4, so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether 2 plus 2 equals 4, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and she's better epistemically placed with respect to 2 plus 2 equals 4 than oneself, and one recognizes these things to be so, and one is not aware of significant contrary testimony regarding 2 plus 2 equals 4. And that is when you can accept that belief. That is when you can defer to another person's opinion or another person's belief to form your own beliefs. TDAP 2 specifies when it is proper to accept another's testimony that P outright. There will also be situations when neither party is in a position to make a knowledgeable judgment as to whether P. So she's saying there's going to be times when there is some sort of belief that neither you or the person next to you are epistemically well enough placed to make a judgment of whether something like 2 plus 2 equals 4. But one is better epistemically placed than the other. In these cases, it will be epistemically rational for the worst placed person to defer to the other's opinion. So if me and Fred are sitting there and I'm saying 2 plus 2 equals 4 and Fred's saying no, 2 plus 2 equals 5, if I have done more study in maths, it makes sense, or it's, what does she say exactly? She says, epistemically rational. It is rational for Fred to accept or defer to my opinion because he hasn't studied mathematics and I have, and I'm more able to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that's what she's saying, that it's okay to defer to the person who is slightly better epistemically placed or has more knowledge on the topic when neither of you know for sure. It does seem epistemically rational for that, while falling short of taking her utterance as an expression of knowledge, hence forming only a tentative belief regarding P. So me and Fred can tentatively accept that 2 plus 2 equals 4. We are open to the idea that it could be wrong, but out of the two of us, that's probably the best we can get to when we're trying to form a belief. It's a tentative belief. This is required when, for instance, an informed decision about how to act is urgently needed. Perhaps someone's going to shoot us if we don't say what 2 plus 2 equals. We would defer to me in that case, because Fred hasn't studied maths, if it's urgently needed. There may be some topics for which this situation is the rule. That is when knowledge as opposed to more or less well-grounded speculation is very hard to come by. It remains true that one should not accept outright another's testimony that P, unless one reasonably believes her to be so placed as to, almost certainly, form knowledgeable belief regarding P. Hence, TDAP 2 is the correct general principle governing the outright acceptance of another's testimony. So we have got, let's follow TDAP 2 if we are going to, when we are trying to accept another's testimony. An explanatory comment is needed on the role of the complementary internal and external components of epistemic propriety in TDAP 1 and 2. I formulated TDAP 1 and 2 incorporating both internal and external components because I'm concerned to describe what happens when things go right and thus how knowledge is spread by means of testimony. Externally, things are going right when the testifier speaks from her expertise-generated knowledge and is sincere, but epistemic rationality has a key internal component. It is not rational to accept unquestioningly the testimony of an expert who, so far as one knows, is no such thing. So it's okay to, or it is not rational, sorry, it is not okay to accept without questioning the testimony of an expert if you don't know that they're an expert. You don't have to accept, it wouldn't be rational, like if you don't know they're an expert, you don't have to accept their testimony. And though not all in epistemically proper, it is subjectively rational and epistemically blame-free to accept another's testimony when one falsely but justifiably believes her to be an expert about the topic, being deceived about this through no fault of one's own. So it's not epistemically proper, but it is subjectively rational and it's blame-free if when we're sitting there and Fred starts going, no, 2 + 2 = 5, trust me, I have a PhD in mathematics. I'm like, oh, okay, right, Fred, you are better placed. And if for whatever reason I genuinely believe that Fred is not lying to me, I couldn't be blamed for agreeing with Fred that 2 + 2 = 5. It would be epistemically blame-free and subjectively rational. It wouldn't be epistemically proper. It wouldn't be actual belief because I've been deceived. But I've been deceived through this of no fault of one's own. I am against purely externalist accounts of when acceptance of testimony is epistemically proper. These fail to incorporate the requirement that the subject maintain epistemic responsibility for her own beliefs. In section 3, I spell out the implications and means of satisfying this requirement. We may distinguish between a weak and strong form of deference to another's testimony. A weak deferential acceptance occurs when I form a belief that on the basis of trust in another's testimony that P, when I myself have no firm pre-existing belief regarding P, nor would I form any firm belief regarding P were I to consider the question whether P, using only my current epistemic resources apart from the current testimony to P. And then there's a strong deferential acceptance occurs when I let another's trusted testimony regarding P override my previous firm belief or disposition to form a firm belief regarding P. So what's happened just here? So she's gone through the example of like why it's okay that if you've been deceived, you're blame-free. Then she's moved on to a different discussion. Okay, here is the difference between 2 different types of deference to another's testimony. So there's the weak and the strong. The weak is that the belief was not firm. Changes formed from testimony. So when I have form a belief on the basis of I trust someone else's testimony when I myself didn't already have a firm existing belief. And I wouldn't form any firm belief were I not to consider the question using only my current epistemic resources. So it's belief, not... I've written this in a very funny way, but essentially it is when I didn't have a firm belief before, I didn't really have any reason to think about it, and I have accepted another's testimony. A strong deferential acceptance is when another's trusted testimony overrides my own previous firm belief. So I already had a firm belief about something, then someone who is like better epistemically placed, is more knowledgeable, is a better expert comes along and changes my belief. The distinction between strong and weak deferential acceptance may or may not turn out to be important. First off, it seems that there could be subject matters where strong deferential acceptance is never epistemically appropriate, although weak deference can be. This fact may illuminate the nature of that subject matter. Whether for weak or strong deferential acceptance, it seems that TDAP2 is the correct normative principle, her sincerity not being in question, and my being aware of no significant contrary testimony. It is epistemically proper that I defer to another's testimony in forming my belief regarding P. or in overriding my own previous belief regarding P, just if I recognize that she is better epistemically placed than I am to determine whether P, and it is epistemically proper that I accept her testimony outright, just if I recognize this, and also that she is so well placed to form, almost certainly, knowledgeable belief regarding P. We may introduce a thin and inclusive sense of expert capturing this core normative necessary condition for deferential acceptance expressed in TDAP 1, which is also normatively sufficient apart from the matters of sincerity and absence of significant contrary testimony. So she's coming back to TDAP 2. If the sincerity is not in question, if there's no significant contrary testimony, it is epistemically proper that I defer to another's testimony if they are better epistemically placed. So she's gone through, okay, here are some different terms about weak deferential acceptance and strong deferential acceptance, and we just keep coming back to TDAP 2 is correct. And then lastly, she gives a definition of expert before we go into the next section. So the definition of expert, she says, is S. So S means subject in philosophy. Subject is an expert about P relative to H at T time, just if at T, S is epistemically well enough placed with respect to P so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether P, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and she is better epistemically placed than H to determine whether P. Okay, so let's read this by subbing in some names because I find that's always easier. So Miss White is an expert about 2 + 2 = 4 relative to Fred at 2 o'clock, just if at 2 o'clock Miss White is epistemically well enough placed with respect to 2 + 2 = 4, so that were she to have or make a judgment to form a conscious belief regarding whether 2 + 2 = 4, her belief would almost certainly be knowledge, and she's better epistemically placed than Fred to determine whether 2 + 2 = 4. That is the definition of expert, according to Elizabeth Fricker. So that brings us to the end of that first section. It's going over the TDAPs. I recommend that you have these pretty well memorized, some sort of form of them memorized, so that you can talk about when Fricker thinks that we should be deferring to another's testimony. And your key questions that you will have tabbed are when can we trust another's testimony, and the testimony, experience, expertise, that key question. There's also a little bit on disagreement there as well, on the disagreement question in that section. So let's go on to the second section, which is 4, reliance on others' word and epistemic self-governance. We have seen, as encapsulated in TDAP 2, how it is rational to accept another's word on a topic and even allow her express judgment to override one's own prior opinion when one knows that she is strongly placed epistemically. So it is rational to accept another's word on a topic if we know that they're an expert, essentially, or pretty well, like they're knowledgeable, and better placed than oneself regarding the matter in question. For each of us, her appreciation of her own circumscribed and feeble epistemic powers and small position in the larger scheme of things, together with her grasp on folk psychology, including where applicable appreciation of others' superior expertise and epistemically more advantageous position, entails that deference to others' opinions is rational in these circumstances. Lack of such appreciation of one's limited powers and others' superior ones, and accompanying refusal to bow to others' judgment or even advice when they are clearly relatively expert, is pig-headed irrationality, not epistemic virtue or strength. So when we don't accept someone else's view when they are clearly an expert, it's pig-headed, is what she said here. And the little bit she said about folk psychology, she's going to come back more to that, but she's talking more about the fact that we can generally tell when people are lying. We can generally interpret what is going on around us. We can interpret when someone is an expert and when someone isn't. And we can sort of have that folk psychology to help us figure that out. But she'll touch on that more. Does this mean then that there is, after all, no loss of epistemic autonomy incurred by the way in which, in our modern condition, we rely on others' knowledge and its technological fruits for whole swathes of fabric of knowledge and in our daily lives, as sketched in my introduction? It does not. So she's like, does this mean that there is no loss of epistemic autonomy, that we don't have any ability to form knowledge for ourselves? Like we always have to defer to others. And she says, no, it does not mean that. It is crucial for the maintenance of epistemic self-governance that our trust in the world of others is not given blindly and universally, but discriminatingly. We need to be discriminatory when we are trying to pick who we believe and how we form our own judgments. So we still do have a knowledge self-governance, able to self-govern ourselves in what we trust and what we believe. By trusting only cannily and with good grounds, we can do much to retain epistemic self-governance. I shall return to this theme shortly, but there is still an important loss of autonomy, as I will now explain. So there is some loss of autonomy. We don't completely lose it. We still have some self-governance, which is saying there is a little bit of a loss of autonomy, and I'm going to explain what. I mentioned our awareness of our own cognitive limitations, our feeble powers. We all can't know everything. We can only see what is here and now, and that only to a limited extent. Our memories, even of this, are less than total and often corrupt. And our inferential powers are feeble. So our memories aren't great. Like we can't be knowledgeable all of the time. We have powers. We can only see what's happening right now in this very moment because even our memories are corrupt and they change and they're not perfect to rely on. A superior being, one who lacked our cognitive limitations and could do all the work herself in finding out about the universe, could be epistemically autonomous in a way that no one of us, with our limited research time and processing capacities, is able to be. So it is possible someone could be absolutely perfect and be able to come up with all their own knowledge and all their own beliefs by themselves. But unfortunately, we're just not capable of that. We need to rely on others to help form some of our beliefs, or our good beliefs, I should specify. So there is a loss of autonomy because we have an awareness of our own cognitive limitations, our memories are corrupt, we have these problems, so we do lose some autonomy in the knowledge and the beliefs that we form because we do have to rely on others to an extent. And we can still choose who we rely on and who we believe, but we don't have full autonomy. And that might be something quite scary for you, the fact that you don't have full autonomy in the beliefs that you form. Oh, that is a bit scary. She would not need, so back to the superior being, she would not need to take anything on trust for another's word because she would have the epistemic power to check up, to find out for herself about everything she wanted to know without reliance on others. We are no such beings, and so we can extend our knowledge beyond a small base only through rational trust in the spoken or written word of others. My trust in another's word is rational when I have good grounds to believe her competent about her topic and sincere, and by this I mean I can know about all kinds of matters which I lack the time or talents to find out for myself. But this knowledge from trust and testimony is knowledge at second hand, or third, or fourth. And as such, my epistemic position, vis-a-vis, what I know is in at least one respect inferior to when I know firsthand. So this sort of loses some autonomy too. The fact that my epistemic position in relation to what I know is in at least one respect inferior to when I know something firsthand. So when I have to defer to someone else, when I use an expert, it's not as strong of a belief as if I were to know it for myself. When I form belief that P through my trust in the speaker's word given to me that P, her testimony that P, I take her to speak from knowledge. That is, this is a normative commitment of my accepting her utterance at face value. As an expression of knowledge, I come to know she does not speak from knowledge. This is a normative defeater for my belief. So when I find out that Fred has been lying, it defeats my belief that 2 + 2 = 5. Additionally, in my own view of knowledge as requiring adequate grounds, I must be disposed upon reflection to form the belief that she speaks from knowledge. This belief is an essential justifying ground for my belief in what I'm told and trustingly accept. And so justifying ground for my belief. Oh, sorry. And so this is the one that's photocopied funny. Sorry, guys. And so must itself be knowledge. In short, my reason for believing P true is because I believe, or I am disposed to form belief upon reflection, that my informant is telling me what she knows. This being so, I know only because someone else's knowledge has been passed on, spread to me by the mechanism of telling, of testimony. Ooh, there's one of our keywords, testimony. So we've got to, I guess, trust these people. And if we don't trust them, it's not a belief that we form. And it can go from more than just one person. I can learn things or come to form beliefs second or third hand. And this comes from testimony. Knowledge can be passed on in this manner through many links in a chain of trusted testimony, but the regress must stop eventually with someone who knows that P not from trust in testimony. So if I know that 2 plus 2 equals 4 from the trusted testimony of my friend Mr. Joy, the maths teacher, and he knows that from his trust in his mathematics professors, and they know that from their trust in blah, 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 and it keeps going back and back and back, then Frick is pointing out the point, well, surely there's someone who just knows that P not from just trust on testimony. There is someone in that line, in that chain of believing 2 plus 2 equals 4, that there is someone who actually knows it not from testimony. So we've got this following axiom. T, if H knows that P through being told that P and trusting the teller, there is or was someone who knows that P in some other way, not in virtue of having been told that P and trusting the teller. So there must be someone who knows the thing not through testimony. It is a consequence of T that if someone knows that P through trust in testimony, there must be some other way in which P is or once was known. Hence, T has the corollary, I can never say this word, and this is going to be one that my students add to my list of words I can't pronounce. Corollary, which means a proposition that follows from another. For any proposition P that can be known, there must be some way other than trust in testimony through which P can or once could be known. So when we have beliefs, there must be someone somewhere who knows it not through testimony. Why cannot a chain of trusted testimony go in a circle, falsifying T? Why can't it just be that perhaps I found out 2 plus 2 equals 4 from Mr. Joy, and Mr. Joy found out 2 plus 2 equals 4 from his maths professor, and his maths professor found out 2 plus 2 equals 4 from me, and it goes around in this circle. Obviously, it would be a much larger circle than just 3 people, but can it just come from a circle? Is that it's people telling each other the same thing? The regress must end with someone who knows that P in some other way, because knowledge requires evidence or grounds. When I know that P from someone's testimony, my personal ground for believing belief that P, the warrant in virtue of which I'm entitled to it, is my knowledge that the informant knows that P, but in taking P to be known, I'm rationally committed to an existential supposition that there is to say that some individual or group of persons between them possesses evidence or warrant for P, which is not just that someone they trust has told them that P, as T expresses, knowledgeable belief based on trusted testimony implicitly refers back to the existence of a non-testimonial ground or warrant for what is testified to, the ground or warrant in virtue of whose possession the original tellers spoke from knowledge. Hence, there cannot be a state of affairs that is known through trust in testimony. A chain of testimonially spread belief, which went in a circle, would lack any empirical grounding. So there would be no empiricism. Remember, that's like the census. It has no scientific or sense-based evidence, no empirical grounding, and what is believed would not be true unless by luck. Consonant with this fact, there is a sense of the evidence for P used in scientific style discourse when it is asked, what is the evidence for P? What is the evidence for 2 plus 2 equals 4? In which someone's testimony that P is not evidence for P at all. For instance, the question, what is the evidence that smoking causes lung cancer? Is not answered by responding, a lot of distinguished scientists have asserted that it does. The question asks for an account of the real evidence, the evidence on which the expert's conclusion is based. The well-groundedness of belief spread through testimony depends on the existence of such non-testimonial evidence for P, that is, on its possession, perhaps distributedly upstream in the chain of informants. So here's an example of the lung cancer. When we know that lung cancer can come from smoking, and that comes from real evidence, well-groundedness of a belief. And then that is spread. So something cannot be known only through testimony. Even though we can defer to other people's testimonies to form our beliefs, there needs to be some actual grounding for that belief somewhere. Now we see the respect in which knowledge from trust in testimony is in one way inferior to owning to it being at second hand. When I know that P solely from trust in testimony, I do not possess the evidence for P. Instead, my knowledge is premised on the existential supposition that there is non-testimonial evidence for P, although I myself do not possess it. And I think this is like one of the most complicated ways to say that believing something or knowing something because your friend told you is not as good as seeing it for yourself, because if you see it for yourself, you actually have the evidence, whereas you're relying on someone else the secondhand way, you don't actually have the evidence yourself. Whereas if it's firsthand, it's stronger because you do have that evidence. You do have that evidence background. I'm rashly committed to the proposition that a person or persons upstream in the chain of informants between them possess that evidence, the grounds for believing P true. Where the proposition is an empirical one that is part of a theory, I'm rationally committed to the proposition that these others have evaluated the evidence and drawn conclusions from it correctly. So I can trust that the people above me in the chain of beliefs who have spread down this information, I believe that they've evaluated the evidence correctly, that when they've done the test about lung cancer and smoking, that they can be trusted to have drawn those conclusions properly. Often, this ability is a large part of a special expertise the others possess via me. It is a weakness in my epistemic position regarding P that my ultimate ground for believing P is this derivative second-order one, the proposition, which I must be disposed to form belief in, that there is empirical warrant, though unknown to me, for believing P. Where my informant's expert status via me is accidental, it does not seem a worry. My son tells me there is some milk left in the fridge, and I believe him, but if it mattered a lot, I could easily check up for myself, and if what he told me were false, I would quickly find out. I can get to the first-hand evidence if need be, and I can evaluate it correctly. But where my reliance on others depends on an expertise they possess relative to me, which is more deep-seated, and I lack the ability to check up for myself, it seems worth it. The existential supposition and dependence on others' epistemic skills and truthfulness is more troubling. So she gives the example of like asking her son if there's any milk left in the fridge, and she can believe him because he's just been in the kitchen and looked in the fridge, so he's more of an expert with respect to her. There's no reason to believe that he's lying. But in that case, I could go up and I could go check the fridge myself, and I could get the belief, I could get the knowledge firsthand. But that's very different, I guess, to the smoking example, is that I'm not a scientist. I can't go and test and check that lung cancer actually is caused by smoking. Or smoking, I should say it the other way around, sorry, that smoking causes lung cancer. I can't do that. And those are two different types of deferring. Epistemic dependence on others is troubling. So the fact that I have to rely on others that smoking causes cancer is troubling. Firstly, because it's risky. That's one reason that epistemic dependence is troubling. One, because it's risky. There are many motives for deceit and causes of honest error. So there are even cases where people genuinely think something is true and they've just had a misunderstanding. And that's risky too. So the fact that people can lie to me and they can be mistaken, risky on the part of each of us. And while each can try to trust only where there is a ground to expect sincerity and competence, as elaborated below, each link in a chain of testimonial transmission incurs its own risk of error. And this is like the broken telephone game you play, that with each person that it passes on to, it becomes less and less reliable, to when you get to the end of the broken telephone, the person has said something completely different to what the first person said. So that that transmission of beliefs becoming very risky, even that way. Another reason that being dependent on other people for knowledge or epistemic dependence is troubling, second, because along with the epistemic dependence on others comes a no less risky practical dependence on them in many areas. For instance, for maintenance of all the technological devices on which one depends on every day, from electric lighting to computer to driving one's car and so forth. I believe the electric company that they know how to make the electricity in my house work. And I've never tried to actually get the belief of what happens with the electricity in my house. I've not investigated that. I don't have time, probably. I maybe could, but it's very hard. It would be almost impossible for me to do. I don't have that knowledge base in electricity or physics or any of that to actually, so I accept the electricity's company's opinion, but then that's risky too, because when we rely on so many things, like think about all the things you've interacted with today that actually have depended on an expert for something else. The way that you put your clothes on, that this is going to be the most warmest way to wear your clothes, or when you turn on your television, or you've turned on your phone, or you've done anything that when you've used a wheel, or used a car, all of these different things you've relied on experts from. And that can be troubling because all of these things you rely on, even like getting electricity, but getting water out of the tap, your access to food is reliable on like experts and people who have beliefs and say that they know how to do these things that they say they can. That's risky too. That's another reason why it's dependence on others, epistemic dependence on others is risky. Because obviously if I just knew how to get water and get electricity and get clothes and all of that stuff and my phone and my TV and I could make them all myself, that would be a lot more trustworthy. I wouldn't be putting myself at risk. But obviously we don't have time for that, to make all of those things all of the time. So that's the second reason. The third reason why dependence on others, or epistemic dependence on others, while it extends one's knowledge base so enormously, also lessens one's ability to rationally to police one's belief system for falsity. So that's the third thing. It makes it, although it extends our knowledge base enormously, we're able to access more knowledge by our acceptance of others' beliefs and others' testimony, but it makes it harder for us to police when someone is being insincere. There are many things that a layperson believes for which she would not know how to assess the scientific evidence which supports them, even if presented with it. This being so, these beliefs of one will lack the characteristic sensitivity to defeating evidence, should it come along, which is usually taken to be a hallmark of belief which amounts to knowledge. I've spelled out the bad news for epistemic self-governance entailed by our dependence on the word of others. The good news is that, as I already emphasized, our trust in others need and should not be given blindly, but cannily on where it is due. So we need to be discriminatory in how we give our trust. We don't just give our trust blindly. Although cognitively limited beings we are, we must perforce, certainly, on others, if we want to enjoy the epistemic and technological riches of modern society. I need to trust others if I want electricity. It would be great if I could generate the electricity myself and knew how to do that, but I need to rely on people if I want those things. We can take care only to trust those who we have good reason to hold worthy of our trust. Fortunately, we all have some basic cognitive equipment to help us assess the sincerity and competence of others in many, though by no means all circumstances. This is because we are all experts, though of varying degrees of skill, in one special topic, namely that of folk psychology. And this is what I was telling you she was going to come back later. The reason why we can rely on other people's testimony is because we are all, maybe like biologically or naturally experts to different degrees of skill in folk psychology. We can tell when people are lying. We can tell when people are being sincere. We have that folk psychology where we can tell what people are saying and what they're doing. A big problem I find with this though is like, but what if it were possible to not be an expert in that? And what about people who do have social, I guess, disabilities in the social sphere, that make it very difficult for them to tell those things? How do those people then form good beliefs? What do we do then? Anyway, back to this. So we're all experts in folk psychology. Thus, where we do not have access to or cannot evaluate the evidence for propositions in some domain ourselves, we move one level up and instead evaluate the experts. So we can evaluate the experts. We might not be able to evaluate the evidence or the beliefs they're giving forward, but we can evaluate them. Our human sources of knowledge about this domain, but in assessing an informant's trustworthiness is not always easy, and sometimes there are not sufficient epistemic resources available to the layperson to enable a firmly based evaluation to be made at all. The risks involved in trusting others are considerable, especially where there are motivations for deception at work. As I've been arguing, there is often good empirical grounds for trusting others, and where it is consistent with our maintenance of our epistemic self-governance, our responsibility for our own beliefs that we believe on trust in the word of others, relying on their report for truth of something where we do not possess for ourselves the evidence, and may not even be capable of appreciating significance. Moreover, we saw in section 2, where I know another to be epistemically expert relative to me on a topic, it is not just rationally permissible, but rationally mandatory for me to accept her judgment in preference to my own, just so long as I have good ground to trust her sincerity. Where there is no good ground to believe an informant trustworthy, however, epistemic self-governance entails that we should not accept reports of others. Caution and canonicness should govern our response to others' testimony. Unless we exercise it, we fail to maintain responsibility for our own beliefs. The end. And that is the end of Elizabeth Fricker. I think that a lot of it is quite big vocab, but hopefully there has been some helpful explanations there for you, and that this video was helpful. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.